Welcome to the Shit Show. My name's Andrea Edwards.
My name's David Coe.
I'm Richard Bussolato, in the bottom left this time.
And my name is Joe Augustine, a forcibly retired male model. We are here on a weekly basis to try and tackle the poly crisis. And as I posted in my post, it's kind of a thing where we kind of know the world's ending, but we just want to have a bit of a discussion before we get into the lobby for the final show. We also try to get diverse points of view. So besides the four of us today, we have someone who is from the world of cybersecurity. He's been a speaker and someone I've seen on stage many times speaking on all things IT. And he joins us today to contribute to our discussion, which is going to be touching on AI in a significant way. He is cybersecurity cloud and data strategy leader Andrew Milroy, a founder of Vector 8, and also, as I said, a speaker who's been sharing his point of view about various topics for quite a long time. Andrew, welcome to the show.
Great to be here. Thanks for the fantastic introduction.
Also a friend of, we think, over 30 years, so that's a bit scary, but primarily a technology analyst. So he's been watching this game for a really long time, and anytime I've got a question about tech, Andy's usually the first person I go to.
And also, Andrea, in all lots of parts of the world, right? And you and I have moved around. We've been in the US at the same time, and Europe at the same time, and Australia and in Singapore at the same time.
Yeah.
Overlapped, and all those different parts of the world.
Would it be fair to refer to you as 8-bit friends?
That works quite well.
Yeah, I think our spouses get a bit bored and a bit yawny when we're together, though.
Well, that's right. Yeah. We always have a lot to talk about.
We do, and oh God, there's a lot going on, and I've been trying to get you on the show for a while, just because from a geopolitical perspective, we always have great chats, but also from the AI perspective. So I'm asking lots of questions and not getting lots of answers. So I thought it'd be good just to bring on one of the experts who's right in the center of seeing what's going on and how it's going. Now, we're going to talk about a lot of things today, but we're not going to talk about a lot of things too. So I'll give you a list of the things we're not going to talk about. And I've got this list from going through the content that's in my weekend read since I published the last one. We're not going to talk about Epstein's birthday card, which also includes Mendelssohn's sacking, although that will probably come up, or Banksy's artwork, the Bolsonaro verdict, which came out today, Israel's bombing in Qatar and what it could possibly mean. We just don't have time to cover that. Israel's claims today that there's going to be no Palestinian state. Poland triggering the NATO Article 4, US Supreme Court decisions that have come out this week, the cancellations of the Tom Hanks Award, the UN Assembly moving to Brussels after the Palestinian representatives refused visas to enter the US, the Department of War, the plight of the South Korean workers that are caught up in the recent ICE raid, and a whole lot more. We're not going to talk about any of them. But one thing we are going to talk about, and we're going to start with, is the whole Charlie Kirk assassination. So obviously a delicate subject, depending on where you're sitting. It sort of landed in my news feed as soon as I woke up yesterday morning, and the whole day was consumed. He's not someone I would say I knew much about. He was just one of those MAGA people that was saying things that I didn't necessarily agree with. What I found quite shocking yesterday was how the rhetoric sort of played out, especially from the right, the war on Democrats, that sort of language, the Reichstag. So I just wanted to get a sense from everyone sort of where you are, what your impression is so far.
Well, I mean, first of all, it's a surprise at how fast everyone rushed to say something about something that they probably had much background about, as in like, I found a lot of people commenting about Charlie Kirk's assassination and all the stuff around it who had not seen what he spoke about and understood what he was doing as well. I mean, that's very normal for us. We tend to jump to things like that. But the amount of commitment to the posture without knowing the full context of things, that's always that's troubling for me in terms of how people are leaning towards it on both sides of it. I saw people who were obviously shocked by it just from a perspective of humanity. But there were a number of people I saw who were also who took it as a major affront, as you know, some saw it as a major affront to the team, their tribe, and I saw some other people as well who heard the news and you know, again, maybe a sign of the world we live in, who expressed glee.
Yeah, yeah, I'm really bothered by the glee.
Can I just kind of jump in? I mean, firstly, I'm very familiar with Charlie Kirk. I'm interested. I was always interested in his arguments that he'd have with the opposite side. And I've always tried my best to understand the MAGA perspective. You know, what's driving them, what the motivation is, what the end game is, where they're coming from, what their arguments are. And he was, one of the MAGA crowd, let's say. That would get out into Oxford University or wherever it is, and or any of these places where people with different political perspectives would typically reside, and he would argue with them. And I listened to a few of these arguments, and I was appalled by his perspectives, to be honest. Denying the existence, like Israel's doing, the existence of Palestine, pushing the replacement theory arguments, anti-vax, the standard, quite strong, MAGA perspective. So, the points of view he had, I did, feel were very extreme and very difficult, to agree with from a evidence-based perspective or ideologically or even logically. But having said that, I think for anybody, he's not a criminal, and for anybody to be murdered or attacked in that way is pretty disgusting, whatever the reason. And it was a murder. I mean, I find that, and to talk about the aftermath, there's a few things that obviously the murder itself is deeply disturbing, whatever his point of view is. But, the things that have happened immediately afterwards, I think, are a bit shocking. The whole narrative, assuming, attacking the political opposition immediately, as though the political opposition was somehow arranging to murder this guy, right? When it's clear it's just outrageous. It's not the case. So using it to create even more polarization, using it to create even more potential violence and trouble. And actually, we use the term assassination. I mean, to me, what was he? He was a journalist / podcaster / polemicist. Is that an assassination or a murder? I mean, to me, it's a murder. If someone shot Rupert Murdoch, who takes the same, point of view of MAGA these days, he supports the perspectives of Tucker Carlson. Would you call it an assassination? It's a murder. So the way the whole thing's been positioned, I think, is a bit strange. And the narrative, the language that's being used, this is a political assassination. No, it's a murder, right? In the same way as other journalists getting shot or killed or murdered. My understanding is that a political assassination is when you assassinate a politician. And this guy, as far as I understand, was not a politician, right? So the cold-blooded murder is what it was. It should be treated as such. It's very, very weird to hear the President of the United States coming out blaming political opponents and describing it as a political assassination or a political hit job. I mean, who knows? And who knows what the motivation for killing him is? I mean, sure, it might be someone who strongly opposed his political perspectives, but there could be a variety of reasons. It could be a crazy guy who just didn't like him. It could be a personal thing. Who knows? I mean, when John Lennon was shot dead, people didn't assume that it was because they didn't like his political perspective. It was a crazy fan, right, that killed him in the end of the day. It wasn't someone who objected to a strong anti-Vietnam stance in his political position. He had very strong political perspectives, for example. So it could have been anyone for any variety of reasons. It might have been the father of a child who'd been murdered at a school who objected to his position on guns, right? It might have been, who knows, right? It might have been someone who objected to his position on gay marriage. It might have been someone who just didn't like his face. Who knows, right? So it's insane the way everybody's rushing to say this is a political assassination or a political hit job.
And dangerous.
And dangerous, And we have absolutely no idea.
And one of the things that really concerns me, just quickly, David, is Oh God, I've just gone blank on what I was going to say. All right, David, you say. I'll see if I can remember.
I was just going to say what Andrew is describing reminds me of a meeting from the European Central Bank in the time when the European debt crisis, and he was asked a question, and Mario Draghi at the time, who was the president, said, when faced between facts and beliefs win. And that was in this sort of, here you are in a rational sort of situation. You got financial journalists, you got kind of economists, and you've got the world, worried over what the economics of the European Union was going to be. Is it collapse? What's going to happen to all the banks and stuff? And Mario Draghi was quite clear in saying, look, this is the reality I face. Between facts, actual real facts, and kind of essentially random beliefs always win.
Mm.
Yeah.
And so what I was going to say is one of the real risks now is the evidence, right? So obviously under Patel, the FBI is not a trusted organization by many. So whatever comes out of this, and they're already questioning the fact that the gun was found in the woods. There's all these questions already coming up around the evidence that's being presented. So the lack of trust in the investigation is also going to create problems that are probably going to hang around for a long time.
There should also be questions around gun control. I mean, there won't be, but there should be questions around gun control. I mean, how were people allowed to, bring guns onto the campus in the first place? I believe they're allowed to there, but there should be questions if you've got a place where you have public figures, speaking in situations like that. It just seems rational that there should be some kind of control around bringing weapons close to where those people are going to be. I mean, they do need, it seems in the United States, sadly, a lot more protection than they're getting.
I'm sure it's a growing industry. Richard?
Yeah, I'm very aligned with Andrew's thoughts here that you need to treat it for what it actually is. It's a cold-blooded murder of someone. It suits the agenda of certain forces to call it a political assassination, and therefore you're going to run with that narrative, like David points out. It's much easier to believe, fiction than facts, and facts can always be distorted into fiction if it suits your purpose. I mean, it's a very narrow line, and what we've seen happening over the last decade in particular with more and more frequency is that you create a narrative and you run with that narrative, and then that narrative becomes the accepted truth without any basis in fact. And I think that's a very, very likely outcome here.
And the facts isn't going to get in the way of the... No, exactly. You can't let, facts spoil a good story, right? Yeah. That's not good. The evidence is largely, what Andrea says is absolutely right, but the reality is the evidence is not going to matter.
True.
No, I don't think so. No.
As they discover things, they'll have to very quickly put a spin on whatever they find. So if they do identify a suspect, they'll have to be, they'll have issues around. They may find he's a registered Republican, for example.
Yes.
They may find there are all kinds of inconvenient truths that they may discover. And he may not be, of course. He could, of course, be exactly.
It could be a registered Republican who saw an ad for a CNN thing before he arrived.
Could be anyone, right? I mean, it could be then it could fit straight into the narrative. Who knows?
Yeah, but I think
they've already gone for the trans angle.
Yeah, it could be a disturbed, but it could fit into the narrative, or they could create it. Who knows?
Exactly. That's the problem. Nobody trusts anything anymore. That's the problem, right?
Well, I think there is this part that you're seeing between sort of the murder of Brian Thompson, the United Health CEO, and through kind of that attempted assassination of Trump. There was another shooting before, and this along that you are seeing kind of I don't know. I mean, people take it in different ways, right? If you're in America, your right to bear arms is the thing to do, and your right to take whatever action you want is the thing to do. But as you get to situations which become even more polarized in that way, to me, it's just an indication of kind of the fragmentation you're going to have. And there is underlying this, and I was saying just before the show, it's quite surprising between people who believe fundamentally that actually you shouldn't kill another person, and people who think that there are reasons that you should kill another person. And we talk about all of this, and whatever the cloud of kind of news and things are, they are all about how to rationalize the righteousness of killing another person. That's basically what's happening around here. And all the talk and all of those things is trying to say, here are reasons why you can.
Yeah. Well, from a cybersecurity perspective, I think a lot of the stuff I've noticed, just going into some of the online sewers, there's some really horrible, stuff, celebrating this, this murder as we've described it. And I can't help but, and it jumps out at me. And I can't help but think, look, I don't want to point fingers and jump on it yet, but we do know that there are certain nation state actors that seek to drive polarization, right? And seek to, again, like we see MAGA doing a lot of the time, seek to take full advantage of an event like this for, to do what they seek to do, which is to continue driving polarization in the United States and the rest of the Western world. And I don't think all of these, messages, these really offensive ones that are celebrating what happened to Charlie Kirk, are coming from real people at all.
Right. Yeah. And that. Yeah. That,
I mean, because I can't think of many people, who, whatever their political perspective, I don't think it's as common as we think for people to go on and celebrate that kind of thing.
Well, I think there are those people, but I don't think they're as effective in using a social media and whatever to get them.
Well, or they're smaller in number, but the voices have been amplified by an algorithm out there.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't think they're significant in number. Those people,
but most people feel like they're significant, right? But you're absolutely right to draw it back to that. I've
not met anyone. I mean, I know pretty much not everyone, but a lot of people I know are obviously opposed to a lot of the views of Charlie Kirk. But I've not met anybody who's seemed to celebrate it or thought it was a good thing that the guy's been murdered.
Yeah. So I just want to say hi to Steve, Nico, and Sadaf, who's saying hi, David.
Hi.
Yeah, no.
I've spoken to anyone who's thought in any way it was a good thing.
But you're moving into a whole sort of new sort of area of conversation, really, around the risks that we face, which is being torn apart by external forces and people believing those forces, which is a massive concern and has been for a long time. There's so many examples of it where there's one or two tweets that get amplified and all of a sudden everyone jumps on it and it becomes this big thing. But, we're seeing some of Elon Musk's tweets, it's a war, the West, the left. I remember back in January, I sort of put a prediction out that anyone that could be labeled with the Antifa name. So just so people know, Antifa isn't a thing. It's an idea. It's not a thing. It's not a group that you're part of, right? So the Antifa sort of terrorist label, I think it's a real risk. Anyone on the left could easily be tarnished with that, and because it's been put in the terrorist bucket, basically, I think that this could be the tipping point for the US. People are talking about civil war on the right. I think people on the left are sort of all sitting there going, "Bloody hell, what are we going to do now?" But it feels like it's sort of cycling up now, and I'm very concerned about what's going on. I've been concerned for a long time, but this feels like a step up.
I'm just curious to understand what's the end game, what's in it for them to have some civil war.
I don't think they're long term.
Why would they want to?
Well, I think getting rid of the 2-term limit to a presidency is a good end game.
Yeah.
I would very natural to do that.
I would absolutely agree with David there. I think the logical conclusion on putting the National Guard on the street because your cities are under threat will result effectively in abolishing Parliament or
Congress
and abolishing the 2-term limit. to get a stronger leader who can deal with all these issues.
It's exactly what Putin did. It's exactly what Xi Jinping did.
Yeah,
they both come from states that had term limits.
Yeah,
and they removed them out of kind of responsibility to look after things in a special situation.
Yeah, or possibly to stop the midterm elections, because those are going to obviously, if the Democrats win, which is likely.
Yeah, very likely. That you will actually effectively freeze Senate and diminish their powers, and then the president can rule by decrees, which is kind of what France has the ability to do in a situation of crisis, which we're very close to here, by the way. It was not pretty the other day.
I just want to remind anybody who's joined us and who's been with us for a while, I have said in the past, we're not a conspiracy theorist group, although I think we're skating right around the edge of that right now.
Yes.
In terms of a story, in terms of what I was thinking about this from a work of fiction perspective, right? If I'm trying to create a story and do this is the kind of impetus that would come from an actor that would want exactly those things to happen. I mean, if you chose somebody who would be an appropriate target, you need to find someone like that who's polarizing in the sense that he has just enough things going for him that he's not. I wouldn't say universally hated by the left, as in like the people who can see what he says as being there's some validity to the way he approaches some stuff, right? I mean, again, I disagree with his points of view. I don't fully disagree with the way he's argued some of those things, as if he's talked about some things in a way that it deserves to be part of a conversation.
Yeah,
and
sure.
So that puts him right in the middle, right in the right place to be the right person for this. If I was choosing a victim, if I were a foreign actor, this would be the chess piece that I would use.
Yeah,
and incredibly close to the Trump family as well. Don't forget that, like really close. And
emotionally charged.
Exactly. So that becomes emotionally charged. And you look at the Gulf War. There was such an intensity of emotion that people wouldn't sort of be able to step back and be rational about it. And so that's the other thing that sort of raises my hackles with this one, the emotions around it.
I want to bring up important points here. There's a difference between seeing a situation and then leaning towards it to direct it in where you want, versus creating a situation in order to create the move that goes along through. And Richard knows from that sort of trading background he has and stuff, when you trade along, you see things happening along. You don't cause them, but you're very, very active in taking the advantage of whatever happens into the direction that you want, whichever it is. And so the confusion between a conspiracy theory and a deliberate action to take advantage of situations in order to manipulate is in some sense kind of locked into a cognitive bias where you sort of think, oh, someone must be doing this in order to do that. But what's happening when you actually start thinking about what's going to happen around and all the rest? When I say, Trump, what was the outcome of this, getting rid of the 2-term limit for the US presidency or something like that, is taking advantage of what is happening, taking advantage of the feelings and the emotions and the ability to then actually manipulate it. That's what, when Andrew talks about, the state actors and those actors within that sort of sewage of the cyber world, in that sense, that's what they do. Right? I'm not sure to what extent they actually go around, hire someone with a gun and go and shoot the gun. But actually, the other way around is much more effective because there's enough randomness happening that you always have an opportunity if you're tuned to it.
Yeah, but I think when using the trading analogy as well, right? In trading, they're the market makers. So these are the market makers of ideas, the ideologies. They make them. They cause the initial push. They are in a sense manipulating the market. And as in trading, you don't know what the overall impact of everything is going to be, but you can set out a plan and say, I'm going to try and push the market in a certain direction. I'm going to manipulate prices so that it causes a kind of panic in the market. It begins to sell off, or I do something, So there is the sense is that there is a market maker that has a desired outcome. They want something out of this, and when it's I'm wearing this shirt, chaos coordinator today. That's the feeling. There's something about this that has the smell of it,
Yeah.
And it could well be that we find out that the person who is responsible for this individually is somebody who just responded, like to the overall exposure to his social media that always keeps talking about prove me wrong, prove me wrong, prove me wrong, and is directly saying, well, take that. I mean, that's also possible.
Yes.
If you take a step back, then the whole mood of things, it's something. It's profitable from from an external party perspective. I mean, like if you talk about Russia, you talk about China. I mean, we tend to look at this and I think, oh, what would I instantly kind of jump to? And I had 3 suspects in mind, right? And I said, Russia, China, Israel. And the last one's going to get me cancelled, I'm sure. But it's that sort of thing.
Well, I mean, I thought, a jihadist, right, as well, potentially.
Yeah.
Well, but back to your point, this could just be some random person without any of.
Yeah, but it could be. Yeah, we could theorize. It could be a random, just a nut job, basically.
Yeah,
and that's
a
the
lot
point.
of them are nut jobs. A lot of these guys are nut jobs.
But this is a very experienced professional nut job who shot like over 200 yards.
A lot of people are pretty handy with guns in America.
Oh, one shot from that distance. So
but you know what? There are loads of people who go and train on shooting ranges and things like that. And we forget he might be lucky. You can take a shot. People do the hole-in-one in golf when they are, their handicap doesn't allow them to do hole-in-one in golf.
Never happened to me.
It's never happened to you either.
I don't know. To me, the professionalism and the quality of the shooting is a part of the story as well.
Which suggests a state actor.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Well, again,
so are we saying a state actor who has had holes in one might be responsible? North Korea comes to mind.
or former military.
But I think my point is when you start thinking about it as being a state actor or something else, you blind yourself to the manipulation that comes because of something that happens.
Yeah.
So you then go along and says, oh, it's a state actor. And you actually then don't pay attention to the fact that the response to it is the manipulation. Yeah. Whether it's a state actor or otherwise, that's how you're nudged along. So we now go caught into, oh, it must be this, it must be that. And we now completely forget, actually, you know what, maybe it's just one of these things that we're constantly being bombarded and constantly being nudged along.
Yeah, and we're also forgetting, his wife and baby girl is 3 years old, and he's got a son who's 1, who and the wife and the daughter were there at the time. So but let's move on to AI. But keep an eye on that and keep an open mind. And I think that's the most important thing we've got to do right now. So I'm going to put Andy in the starring seat. Where are you? Okay.
Oh wow. Thank you.
So we're going to ask you. So just to sort of set the tone, just to get a sense of where you are on AI and its current impact. So just sort of introduce us to AI from Andy's world.
All right, so I'm in the hot seat now. Great. So let me think. I'm really going to speak off the cuff here, because my views are changing all the time. Right. My take on it is that we're at the absolute very beginning of something incredibly big. It does remind me, Andrea, of the period of time when we first met, when the .com boom was kicking off, and then in full strength. So look, what I've had to do quite a lot for a variety of different projects, some cybersecurity, some data management, some in other areas. Had to have quite in-depth conversations over the last few months with IT decision makers and other C-level folks who are involved in this, as well as obviously security people. Anyway, let me just cut to the chase and not sound so boring, but that's just the kind of background to it. But what we're seeing is that with big companies, they're experimenting, right? So there's a lot of proof of concept, a lot of pilots kind of nibbling around the edge in those organizations. And my take on it is the reason that AI is not exploding within those companies, is not taking off, is nothing to do with technology. It's purely to do with capability. It's to do with organizational structure, existing silos, existing roles, the way things are currently done. And it was the same at the time of the dot-com boom. It took a while. But what we're seeing is companies come out of nowhere that are built on AI. So if you think back to the dot-com boom, a lot of the biggest companies in the world today didn't even exist. They're born in the cloud, right? A lot of the companies, whether it be travel companies we use, accommodation companies, the Airbnbs, the Ubers of this world, the Googles, Facebooks. I mean, you name the biggest companies in the world today, with the exception perhaps of Microsoft, they all pretty much all came about during or after the dot-com boom. And we're starting to see that in AI. So you're having all these smaller companies do funky, disruptive things in finance and healthcare and accounting and HR and coding, you name it. And what I think is going to start happening is as they kind of emerge, the existing legacy companies we know of today some of them are going to change very rapidly, and others are not, and they're just going to disappear, like we saw 25, 30 years ago. But it's a tsunami that is coming, and the first place we'll see it is in tech itself. So like in the dot-com period of time, we'll start seeing some tech companies that aren't adapting fast enough to this AI world struggle and maybe do some acquisitions and maybe just vanish and cease to exist. Because we're seeing development. I had this conversation with someone just a few minutes ago who was saying that he's not seeing the development team shrink as much as he expected because of all the vibe coding and the role of AI in application development today. But the point I made back to him is that where it has happened, the impact has been profound. Development teams have shrunk enormously. It's not that they'll go away entirely, applications, but you'll always need skilled developers. But if you can have all this kind of AI coding, all this vibe coding, it means that any of us can do basic application development ourselves, right? So, and that really is quite transformational. It's a bit like spreadsheet work. We all do it ourselves now, but there was a time where you'd have needed some specialist to do that kind of work, or the document work that we do, or some of the other work that we do online. Coding is something that will be an activity you won't need specialists for as much moving forward. And we're seeing that happen, very, very fast. I think also in people's day-to-day life, the use of ChatGPT and other consumer generative AI tools is widespread, and consumers are discovering, again, we discussed this recently, Andrea, on how they can become much more productive and do a better job than they would previously have done using some of these tools. Big companies aren't necessarily allowing that to be done internally. They're still controlling very tightly how Copilot and ChatGPT is used within the enterprise. But individuals are going and doing work, shadow AI work, using these tools independently. The company's saying, use this, please. And then they're thinking, well, hey, it's nothing like as good as what I can use at home. So they're using their own personal tools to help them with a lot of the work. And that's the consumerization trend that we saw in cloud and some of the other areas. So the consumerization trend will lead to people learning themselves, using AI at work, and then eventually the company saying, look, clearly there are benefits to this, and rather than trying to stop it and block it, which is where we're at today, they'll allow it. I mean, I can talk for ages and ages about that. I've hit a few points there in a rather unstructured way.
It's just a really good introduction, especially the companies built on AI versus the companies adapting to AI. I think that's a really good perspective because, of course, that's what happened in the dot-com era, right? But we also saw that at the end of the dot-com era, the sort of the fallout and how huge it was. And we've talked about that on the show as well. So we saw a report recently, the 90% of deployments aren't delivering savings or benefits. So, Gartner's said they're already in the trough of dissolution. You don't think it's overhyped, right?
No, as you'd expect, right? At an early stage, of course, you'd expect a relatively small proportion to deliver, what people are looking for. And if you think about, again, the dot-com boom, everybody used to interview Jeff Bezos and go, but you don't make a profit. He used to get ridiculed, right? So a lot of these dot-com startups were ridiculed because they weren't making money, right? And we're seeing a similar thing here as well. To start off with, there's a lot of money, huge amounts of money been thrown at data centers, and we're not paying much to these AI guys for use of their tools. And you just think, how does the economics work there? But it's like the early dot-com days, huge investments being made in this infrastructure on the assumption we're all going to dictate to it, and everybody will be using it really widely, and then it'll just explode, and they'll start making huge amounts of money out of it.
But the amount of money, like the dot-com investment, was nowhere near what's being invested today. Nowhere near, right? And then you said the consumer pricing of it, $10, $20, $30 a month. That's not going to cover it. I think I saw an article they need 3.8 billion paying consumer customers to cover some of the expenses being incurred. So the sheer scale of the cost.
It's true. But when it gets into the enterprise, and it's used widely for so many things, then they will start earning more, and they'll probably start charging based on GPU usage, right? On the pricing structures will start changing in the enterprise, so it'll look cheap to start with, and then it'll grow and spread its tentacles, and they'll pay a lot. Like with, again, I hate going back to it again, but we saw a similar pattern in the dot-com period. You're right; it's a larger amount, but it's expected to happen faster, and I think it will. Just when I see how fast it's changing the way ordinary people do their work. I think I mentioned to you, and I spoke to a marketing guy who was telling me that putting together a marketing plan takes them half a day instead of a month, for example, right? So we're seeing the huge impact it has. Developers saying that they can put something together, at a fraction of the amount of time it would have taken them in the past by using some of these AI tools. So it is going to happen inevitably.
Is everyone going to just have the same marketing plan?
Well, I think if I could just jump in here, right? The thing about AI is it lets you create just as bad a plan in half the time.
True.
Yeah.
So the fact that a plan's out there and it looks and feels like something that looks real and whatever it is doesn't mean it actually is going to absolutely work. It just has all the trappings of it. So yeah, you can. Technically speaking, you can create all the stuff that would have taken. It compresses time. That's a really major thing. But in terms of the quality, I mean, we're going to be. I think we're several generations away. It's going to come. But we're generations away when we get to the point where we have expert users of the tools, right? So you have the same way like video, home video came about. You have the ability to create your own content, and you see on the internet there's lots and lots of content that's come about. And now we are arriving at the point where seriously, a lot of consumers, a lot more people, the true democratization of media creation, I think, has begun now. It's taken generations of iterations to arrive there. So you're going to have the expert users. So right now we have a lot of people who are not experts using AI. So there's a story that comes to mind, which was a story that was in the local news in Singapore, where a man in family court presented his case. And it seemed like a really good case, except for the citations, which were all made up, right? And he had used ChatGPT to put together his case as he represented himself. And it's a typical case. Someone who is not an expert going about it and believing that he could create expert results, right? So the expertise in AI is going to come from people who are really good at the foundational work, right? So you're going to have really good doctors, really good researchers who are going to combine that with AI and then be able to sort of like check the work and be able to use a network maybe of other AIs to be able to check the work and look for problems. It's just like the people who investigate data, right? They look into these numbers and they go, something about this isn't quite right, or they figure out how something about this isn't quite right. And that's going to produce a next level sort of thing. So right now. We were in the .com boom ourselves. We tried to ride it. We were involved in chasing a business solution, and we were just doing what everybody else was doing. It was an opportunity, and if you did not jump in on the opportunity, then you were wasting your time doing something that was less productive, right? So I think AI simply is that right now, and I think we're going to speak about the risks that the business world faces, or the world in general faces, in that kind of pursuit of profits.
I just want to add a little bit to that. Jeff Bezos and all the rest.
Sorry, wrong one.
And Amazon. Amazon had its highest year of net profit, which is profit after expenses and so on, before tax, last year at about $50 billion. And it's a $2.4 trillion company. This year, in the 12 months up to June, its net profit is about $70 billion, which is kind of like 2.5% or something on the $2.5 trillion company. So finally, it has made it to profit. But it's not an amazing profit that actually the pricing, price earning ratio was anticipating. So I've no doubt AI will go through periods and it will get on to where we go. And I've no doubt at some point it becomes profitable. But I strongly suspect that profit, if it actually gets there and when it gets there, is going to be much lower than what people anticipate on pricing in now, simply because people price for future stuff.
Well,
Why? You don't market. And the other part of this is, of course, in all of this financial pricing, and this is not at all to do with the ability of AI to do things and so on. I was using Copilot yesterday, and it's quite an interesting story. Maybe we got time to go about that. But it is about that argument of the value it's going to create, either in financial terms or in other terms that it is. But at least from the financial terms, all of those arguments believe that the world is not going to change ahead in the way of it becoming more difficult.
Yeah.
They all presume that climate change does not matter.
Yeah. That's right.
All of those projections assume climate change does not matter.
Yeah. Every time I hear a futurist, I think that, David. It's really interesting. So I want to bring Andy back. And so one of the things I'm always trying to do, is just try to see what the future lies, right? And I'm never going to spend the time understanding the technology. It's not who I am. So AI companions are starting to come up. Apparently will be around next year. So we're all going to have a little one in our pocket. Now, you could argue we've already got telephones, right? So who cares, right? It's all the same. But it doesn't feel like the same thing to me, the idea of this AI in your pocket that basically listens to every single thing you do all day. And then it becomes a part of your life, and it sort of makes decisions for you if you empower it. When you sort of look ahead, what are you seeing?
Well, look, I think you can kind of see it if you look at the ChatGPT interface. So they're trying to create an ecosystem. So when you log on or go into whatever device you've got, logging on will probably be voice activated, or it already is, right, for a lot of devices now. Your immediate interface will no longer necessarily be the traditional Microsoft one or whatever it might be. It'll be maybe an Anthropic one or an Open AI one. And you'll have lots of tools and capabilities associated with that might be to do both personal and professional, right? So again, I'm just thinking in the short term, and I can't think way ahead, but in the next few years, you might say, okay, to whatever your AI is, let's talk more about gardening or my health or whatever it might be, and it'll have, basically be an agent. It'll have the data it needs. It'll have the memory and the cognition, the ability to reason, and if you wish, it can act for you. So you'll say, look, can you just arrange an appointment at the GP for me for another blood test, please? And it'll do that. That's kind of how I envisage it. So you'll go into that particular. So every little project, it'll be a kind of agent that you've built. He's just effectively verbally, and of course, the more you use this and the more you go down these avenues and the more power that you want, that's where they get you addicted and you start paying more, by the way.
Yeah, but then
I
they
look
also,
at how much I spent on Microsoft over the years. At first, I spent nothing on Microsoft. I used to use, I guess I can say this, it was so long ago, just pirated discs or pirated CDs, right? And now they've got me locked into getting stuff off the cloud, and I have to use Teams, everything now, right? So I'm in that ecosystem. I can't escape from it. And each year they seem to increase the price just to me, a relatively low-level individual user, 20 or 30%, right? So I envisage something similar happening with these tools, right? I mean, I know that's very dull the way I've described it, but I think that's the way it'll be. It'll be voice activated. You'll have a bunch of agents, and what we mean by agent, I think, as we've discussed, is it can perceive, reason, and act, but you can control whether or not you want it to act and how you want it to act, and you'll just have a range of those, right? And they'll be in whatever device you're using. It might be a watch, it might not necessarily be, a phone type device that we carry around. It could just be a little thing in your wrist, or glasses, whatever, right? Or any of them.
Could I just jump in very quickly there, because you mentioned something about Microsoft's fees going up, and this is something that I've been trying to spread to everybody who will hear it. There's an option to not include AI as part of the upgrade that automatically comes to you. So if you're an Office 365 subscriber, the renewal rate actually is the rate that includes Copilot, and you can actually opt on your settings to renew only at what they call classic mode.
Well, that's useful.
So it'll save you 30%, which we did for our family, but very sneaky, because most people won't do it. Most people won't figure it out and go. But if you are on Microsoft Office 365, head down to your settings, your account settings on the website, on your subscription settings, and if you don't want Copilot to be charged, it's right. It's a 30% bump, I think.
That's really important for them that you use Copilot, because they don't want people migrating to OpenAI. But
Copilot's so crap. It's unbelievably crap. But it's shockingly, I couldn't believe how bad it was when I used it for something, and I used it. So I asked it to find the bits of my LinkedIn book that were out of date, needed to be updated. It's a Microsoft-owned product. Microsoft owns LinkedIn, and it gave me data that was 2 years old. I was like, what the hell? And it took 2 weeks for it to deliver. But the thing I'm sort of thinking about when I think of the companions is, first of all, there's going to be a period where you'll have the early adopters, then you'll have the majority, then you'll have the last adopters, right? But privacy. So I'm talking to someone who's got a companion. I don't have a companion. Do I have a right to say to them, you need to get that away from me because I don't want to be in your companion? But the other thing is data acquisition, and obviously people are giving away so much of their personal data already, willingly, the health data, all that sort of stuff. But this is a whole new level, and our data data is the new oil, has been a saying for a long time, but it really is at the point where data is the new oil, where where these private companies will have every single piece of information on us because they're with us, interacting with us. And of course, the other thing to consider is, do we get corporate companions? So you, as part of your job, you used to get a phone, now you get an AI companion. And what you think about the privacy and the legislation around that sort of stuff, but the data, the privacy,
Look, I think that's what I find a bit troublesome is what's happening again, in line with quite a few things happening in the US these days, is the desire to peel back any regulation or control on AI in the US at the moment, and then to put a huge amount of pressure on other countries to also not regulate or control, these platforms. And I think it's a real risk. I think it's important. I mean, there are features that allow you to control to some extent how and where your data is used within these tools. But nevertheless, a lot of people are not going to be particularly concerned. I mean, I've actually thought about that. I've thought, because I put my health data in, but I think, well, what use would that be for anyone anyway? And I don't mind if my health data is aggregated to look at, is used in a positive way, because I think it's more likely if my health data is shared, it would be used in a positive way than a negative way, right? For me personally. So I think there's plenty of stuff I don't mind sharing at all. If someone goes in and they want to get more information about average rates of something, and they're using my health data for that, I don't have a problem with that. Average blood pressure for someone at a certain age of a certain gender, whatever it might be.
But it can impact your insurance, right? If it's sold to an insurance company.
I mean, you're right. There is that risk. Maybe I'm being cavalier about it, thinking, well, I've got nothing to worry about. Maybe if I did have some serious health problem, I might be a little bit more cautious about it, which is a very good point. But yeah, it's look, I think it's a huge risk. But the sense I get over time and talking to younger people is there seems to be less and less concern around data leaks or anyone getting hold of your data, right? Even big companies. So when I talk about cybersecurity, the big companies, they're only bothered about A, compliance, or B, an attack that knocks them out. Whatever they say, I don't think they really worry about data leaks, anything like as much as they should. And the penalties they face when those data leaks occur in most jurisdictions are woefully inadequate. So I think we're moving to a world where people, and young people, just doesn't seem to be on their radar screen. I keep telling my kids that anything you do online will be there permanently for the rest of your life. It doesn't register. They do ridiculous things that I would never even consider doing online. I mean, stupid TikTok, things like that. Things that might be very, very embarrassing when you get older. Right?
14-year-old Andrew might have been a bit risque.
Well, lucky, right? Lucky, right? But it's, but I guess to the point, I think we're moving to a world where privacies and data protection, sadly, is becoming less of a concern. And again, the guardrails around that in the US have been weakened extraordinarily. So I think that from a cybersecurity perspective, the concerns will be more around knocking businesses or critical infrastructure out, stuff that has an impact on just the running of an economy. And you can see that with the kind of the way the regulations have been tweaked in the US. They're not as bothered about Chinese or Russian actors getting hold of data. They're not as bothered about disinformation or tracking Russian or Chinese disinformation campaigns, but they are bothered about critical infrastructure and secure software coding as well. Right. So I think that's kind of the direction we're moving in, unfortunately, because I do think it's really risky. I think the strategy of the Chinese government has been to get as much data as it possibly can on its, I mean the People's Republic of China, not Taiwan here, but the Chinese government's approach has been to get as much data as it can on every single person in China, and to use that data, it's for some good purposes, but also to weaponize it, right, for people that don't behave themselves, right? They can affect their ability to get mortgages and so on, or don't behave themselves in the eyes of the government. So that's quite scary what they're doing, but it seems that they're aiming to do that for the entire population of the world, right? There was a recent discovery of lots of data been taken out of various US organizations, and they pointed it at the People's Republic of China, but they've not made too much of a fuss about it. I don't think they're really too bothered, but I think what the PRC is trying to do is have that kind of data on everyone, so as it knows, if it wants to have some kind of campaign that's launching, it knows what time people are likely to buy chocolate bars in a suburb of Bristol, for example, or what time people are likely to go to a certain hawker stall in Singapore, right? And what exactly the profile of the people are, perhaps right down to the individuals. What time Andrea is likely to get, a coffee in Qatar, if at all.
Yeah.
And then that information might then be used for some, campaign, some disinformation or some wider goal or objective that the government has to influence events in Singapore or the UK or Australia. So So
the geopolitical ramifications are
so
huge.
that's where it's going. It seems that these huge entities are sucking up vast amounts of data. So it just gives them more influence, right? Over and more control over people.
So that's the geopolitical sort of.
Yeah, but even the hyperscalers and the AI companies, it helps them sell more, right? It helps them make more money. So you've got certain nation state actors that helps them influence. You got the huge tech companies, and it helps them make money.
Yeah.
I don't dispute that, but what you're describing is this part of, you know, if you go along in a conventional supply chain and you say, you know, how do I have, you know, get the just in time to work perfectly better? That's exactly what you do. What time are people going to be at my coffee shop chains? And so I therefore make sure the delivery gets ahead of that, but not too much ahead because there's no storage. So I know exactly how much there is. And that's the path that we've gone down. I mean, a lot of those apps and things. I think what is interesting to me about AI is the stuff which is not what we're doing that it can actually get us to do in a way. And that's where that development and growth kind of comes in. It's like you look at Amazon. Amazon makes 50% of its revenues from its web services, which is all the stuff of, you know, kind of the computing on demand and all of those things that you can tap into. And I've got friends who go along and use that as and it developed so cloud computing that comes along through. That's something which at the time when it was a bookshop, nobody ever thought of doing things in that way. There was always a physical computer in front of them. That's what you used. Nowadays, you know, people don't buy computers in that sense because most of the computing power exists somewhere else. So I don't know where that necessarily is. I think that data and that information stuff, you know, everything you do is out there anyway, is on the web. I think that's kind of a norm. Are stage actors benevolent or malevolent? You know, we talked about Charlie Kirk and the US and the reactions to it. We look at China and what it does in one sense, but there's the other side of this. My sister talks about she was visiting China and she was basically saying, you know, she was crossing a road, kind of effectively jaywalking thing. Her friend said, "Don't do that, you get fined." And she says, "Well, how do they know?" "Well, your phone." You know, that kind of stuff. Immediately you get pinged. You know, you just been fined, you know, $60 or whatever the equivalent is or something. But people kind of live within that and actually think, you know what, that keeps everybody safe and it does that job. So there's the spectrum of where your freedom actually is, because there's no freedom without sort of limitation.
Like random breath tests.
Yeah, I just, you know, there's collective societies versus individual societies. I suppose one of the things I'd like to talk to Andy about is, like, you know, how do people prepare? Like, so one of the things you were talking about with your health is that you are actively knowledgeable about you're sharing it and you don't see a risk. A lot of people, like I talk to my boys about it all the time. Don't put that on social media. You don't want that. You know, don't talk about that even on the phone. You know, there's things you've got to, you know, you don't put into the data. People don't think about this stuff. So before they know it, they're owned by it, right? So I don't know, how should people be thinking about this? I mean, taking an interest is a good start, right?
You mean generally, how should people be thinking about it? You mean how should they be? Well, actually, one thing, I mean, I don't know, but if you can give the anecdote of where your boys are with these tools, but, you know, I've noticed a lot of the younger kids aren't that into these AI tools.
No, they're mine.
Yeah, and I think it's more people in the workplace that are into it. It's not really a young person thing. Occasionally they'll use it to help them with their homework, but, you know, it's not. Even that they use surprisingly. I was surprised at how little they use it. But, you know, how should people kind of deal with these things? What can they put in and what can they not put in? Look, I think I think sooner or later it's going to be hard if you're online at all, right? If you do anything online to protect your personal data, right? So even if you think about it, even, you know, I mean, for example, even if I didn't put my personal data my personal health data into ChatGPT, I still get emailed my test results. Right, my doctor will still have some. I think in Western Australia there's an online health, portal with details of my. Actually, you have to opt to have your stuff put in there, but still, most people's health care details are residing there, and if not there, on some network device. So I think whatever you do, it's going to be hard to stop huge amounts of your personal data from getting sucked up, because so much of what you do is sitting somewhere online. And I don't think you can get too paranoid about it at this stage, because it's just a reality. And as I think David indicated, there's some good and there's some bad, right? So so the Chinese government, there's probably a strong argument. If somebody said to me, do I think it was wrong, that example of it jaywalking? Well, perhaps not really, right? If it stops people, if it reduces road deaths, it's like getting breathalyzed, the random breath tests in Australia. When that first happened to me, I was appalled at that. That intrusion. I'd not committed a crime, but the police were stopping me and making me breathe into something when I'd done nothing. Right? I was really quite shocked when that first happened to me. And here in Western Australia, it seems to happen to me every couple of weeks. Right? I don't know how they have the resources, but I think the reason it's so common in Western Australia is because they have a higher road death mortality rate than other states. A lot of that has to do with the sheer size of the state and the amount of driving that people do. But I can't object to it, right? When I think about it, okay, they're trying to do a good thing. And it does intrude into my privacy. It is very intrusive what they do, but and they cause traffic jams and everything. But look, they're trying to do the right thing, and I think a lot of the time, again, I'm not saying everything they do, but a lot of the time, governments are trying to do good things with data, like reduce mortality from a variety of different things, or accidents, or make traffic, flow more smoothly, or deliver services more effectively, or whatever. It's not all horrible stuff that they want to do with it, and I just think whatever you do, your data is going to get into the hands of large organizations, whether they be government or big private companies trying to make money out of it. And if you want to kind of operate in today's world, there's not really too much you can do about it. It's just a reality that you're dealing with. All you can do is try to lobby, as you say, be aware of it, of what's happening, and perhaps as a maybe it'll become a political issue. Governments regulating regulating themselves and these huge organizations. It doesn't look like they're doing it at the moment, but maybe over time, when something happens, it gets out of control, there will be pressure from people to do something about it. But I don't think we're anywhere near that yet.
No.
I mean, look at China, right? I don't think your average citizen of the PRC objects to what the government is doing with data at the moment.
Yeah.
No,
right?
I'd like to connect something else up together with this, if I may. Within our health, a lot of those things are collective. They're kind of the collective benefits versus the individual kind of intrusion. In that way, vaccine, what's happening in America with the vaccine policy in that way. Vaccines work when a population is vaccinated because it just gets rid of the pathogen. It kind of kills it off. It doesn't give it a chance to be there in that aspect of it. And a lot of these things work in that way, that sort of collective aspect of it. The part that people object to is where they don't feel that this collective behavior is emergent out of individual desire for it, and that's kind of how their own governance has formed, versus the dictatorial and authoritarian part. And I think that's where, going back to Charlie Kirk and everything else, in some sense, the reactions is the sense that somehow we're all being manipulated into it, and we've lost the ability to come into agreement with it. I was talking to someone who's telling me about the anti-vax and how they're coming up with suggestions that actually maybe what people should do is to be exposed to some of that pathogen in small amounts so that they can develop an immunity to it. And then there won't be any need to vaccinate at all.
I've got an aunt who was in calipers her whole life from polio, and she's in a wheelchair now. And the consensus, it has to be a percentage, and there's always a small percentage that doesn't agree, right? They're dictating everything at the moment, that small percentage, and I think that's the problem. The majority should have the say. So I just want to we can move on to some other stuff, but just for everyone here, Andy, like there's a lot of people, they're sort of sitting there, they're using AI, and everyone's talking about how you can use AI, and those posts are relentless. They're never going to stop. There's not as many cheat sheets being shared now, which is kind of good, because that was getting really tedious. But my question is always, what will it do to me? Not what can I do with it, but what will it do to me? And I suppose that's where most people don't really. There's a lot of fear wrapped around that. So when you sort of think about it, like sort of say you're talking to your mum, she might be retired now, so but someone in our age group who isn't sort of tech aware, what do you say to him?
I've always been a massive tech optimist, right? I mean, I guess because I've been in tech, so I've always thought, hey, this is really, really good. Have you seen this or how it does this? So I'm actually trying to get my mother to use ChatGPT. I'm struggling with that one. I mean, I got her to use technology up to then, but so your question is, what do you say to people about how it's going to affect their lives?
Yeah,
over time,
or their work. Because if people are sitting in ignorance and fear, or then incapable of looking ahead, and they're only looking at now and what you can do now.
Well, look, I try to encourage my kids to use. I mean, they're not very interested, but I think when there's new technology around, there's all kinds of interesting things you can do with it. I mean, as I said to you, things like I managed to figure out what was wrong with my roof using AI. Right, it saved me a lot of money. It helps me with stuff in the garden, right? So I apply it to all kinds of things, but I've always been a bit like that with technology when I've discovered how easy something, when I get this eureka moment with it. And I try to encourage others to view it in the same way, right? Not to look at the scary things, but to see the benefits of it. Because we haven't, look, I'm sure there are horrible things that you hear about happening, but I guess maybe it's not the right thing to say, but so far I've not seen it around in the community around me, technology having a terrible impact on them, right? By and large, the people around me that I know, and even if I go back to the town I grew up in, I've not seen it. The worst impact I've seen of technology now is the misinformation and social media, right? The polarization it's causing. And maybe AI will cause that to go further. So there are people I know, back home or that I've known in different parts of the world, who, for example, have gone down what I would describe as the rabbit hole, right? Who've got all these points of strong. You must know a few, right? Who are strongly anti-vax. Think there's some big conspiracy around the vaccines. They believe a lot of these narratives, right? That, dare I say it, the MAGA crowd, I don't want to point fingers specifically at, say, Charlie Kirk, but the MAGA crowd have got a lot of these perspectives, and they're doing that are based on limited fact, that are effectively disinformation, that they're being very successful at spreading, and a lot of people are buying into that. And I think that's the kind of dangerous side, but there's no one in my immediate I can't change those people. I can have conversations with those people, but I can't change them if they believe it. I mean, those people usually think that they go, well, where are you getting your information from, right? So when I challenge those people, so what I try and do is
the biggest threat,
open conversations with them. I think the biggest threat is still this polarization that's been caused by these extremely these perspectives that can no longer be reconciled, the lack of consensus. And I think AI could potentially amplify that. And also it can be used as a tool for making this polarization even greater. I mean, there are a lot of people, I think you sent me something about harassment online and horrible trolling that, Carol Kilwadadar talked about, and I think there was something you sent me about the AI porn, right, where you put someone's head on a porn actor and circulate it, sextortion, that kind of thing. So I think that's already kind of going on, but I think AI can turbocharge, some of these rather unpleasant things that we're already seeing. So, people being trolled and harassed online because somebody doesn't like what they've said, for example. I think AI can make that nastier and more powerful. I think some of these, memes that go viral very quickly, and we're seeing some of that stuff around Charlie Kirk. I think AI can accelerate that, make it more extreme. Those are some of the dangers of it, right? In my day-to-day life, of course, I'm not seeing that, but I do speak to people that I know, and I think, where are they getting these ideas from? And I can't change their ideas, because when I try to, they just think I'm, a centrist dad, or they'll have some, I watch Rory Stewart and Alistair Campbell, the rest is politics. They'll stereotype me. I read The Guardian, whatever, right?
Yeah.
And they'll stereotype me, and I'll say, and I'll have conversations with them. People like Charlie Kirk, right? I mean, that was one of the things that Charlie Kirk did, is he came out and he actually had these debates with people like me. So I do know people, I wouldn't say quite like Charlie Kirk, but people with a similar worldview as Charlie Kirk, and I cannot change them, whatever I do. But what I worry about with AI and technology is it's creating this polarization and inability to find a middle ground, right? Which is how societies have typically, democratic societies have functioned by having a middle ground.
Yeah.
And it worries me that, I think it's a threat we could go on about this. I think it's a threat to democracy. Right? When you don't have a middle ground, that screws up democracy, and you end up moving to kind of authoritarian dictatorship models, right?
Yeah.
Inevitably.
Well, and the other big issue is, of course, trust has been collapsing for 20 years, and this is like the death knell in trust.
And there are folks that will use AI to consciously work at eroding that trust.
Yeah.
And destroying that ability of having a trust-based middle ground, right? Like, growing up in the UK, there was always agreements around the NHS, the role of the government. There was a whole, whether you were Tory or Labour or whatever your political position was, there was a whole 80% of the stuff you'd agree with, right? There was maybe 20 or 30% you disagree with. If you look at the way the discourse is today, it's probably, 20% you can agree with guys who've gone down that other rabbit hole in, right? And 80% you disagree on. And I think that this is a serious danger to democracy.
Isn't that
maybe just a failure, the inbuilt failure that is part of democracy, right? Because to gain your ability to have a say, to get the mandate, you need to appeal to the audience. You need to get the audience to get behind you, and that there's very little political advantage to be centrist, right? I mean, it's not a whole bunch of people who represent in the middle, right? It's
well, since the end of World War II until quite recently, you could say that most Western democracies, the majority of the people were somewhere in the middle. They weren't extreme either side. They were in the middle. They were centrist. It's only now that you're getting these extremes emerge, where you're getting maybe 30% in one extreme, 30% in the other extreme, and a minority in the middle, right? It's I'm in the middle. I mean, but maybe that's just my generation, my age. But I feel myself becoming a smaller and smaller minority, and I think technology has got a lot to answer for. I think it's to do with social media and AI and tools that this is starting to happen. And I do think it's a sad thing, because I think democracy's been the most successful political model that we've ever had, right? If you look at the experience in democratic countries, really since the end of World War II, it's been highly successful, and it has held governments to account. Without it, it's very difficult to hold governments to account, and governments that have been corrupt, have been, done the wrong thing, have got voted out.
Not even if they've done the wrong thing, they just get voted out because of misinformation.
Or they get voted out for not doing. Yeah, you're right. They get voted out for not moving with the majority, right? For not moving with
good enough storytellers. Yeah.
But you look at say, I hate using the UK as an example over and over again, but it's an obvious one to use. the government, the John Major government was very centrist. The Blair government was Labour, moving more into the centre. Thatcher was a bit unusual. She moved the whole spectrum to the right. But again, after World War II, you couldn't tell the difference between a Conservative or a Labour government, really. They were they basically targeted the same group of people in the middle, and it was the same kind of people running them.
Just to sort of wrap up the AI thing, and I'll ask you guys after if you want to leave anything, ask any questions. But for people listening who maybe haven't really started, I say to everyone, you've got to start using some level of AI, and it's got to be more than ChatGPT, as we discussed. But what would you, the idea that the successful businesses of the future will be the ones that are built on AI today. What would you suggest to everyone? All right, someone's making some noise. Who is it?
Sorry, that was me. I've got big thighs.
What would I suggest in terms of what businesses should do?
Or individuals, either. Look,
I think you need to educate yourself. Look, I think look, for very little money at the moment, you can I'm not saying I'm not saying get rid of ChatGPT necessarily, but you can subscribe to these platforms. I don't want to sell them here, but there are these aggregators that for $10 you get access to a whole range of different LLMs and different tools. And I think it's really powerful just to play around with those and see what you can do. And they're very usable. They're very, very easy to use. So I would recommend anyone who's interested having a go with. I think we discussed one of them, Andrea, when we last met. Yeah. I think having a go with that.
It was from Joe. Joe recommended it, so I've been recommending it to everyone. It's abacus.ai, and it just gives.
Right?
Yeah, I've done some interesting stuff with DeepSeek through it as well.
Yeah, so just to play around, right, as an individual, and I think as a company, you've really got to. I mean, look, they're already working on the proof of concept, but I think the challenges that companies are having is that AI goes across different silos and different functions. So organizationally and from an organizational and capability perspective, big companies are really struggling with it. I think they're going to have to accept that they may have to be quite radical, right? They're going to be disrupted. They're going to be transformed, and they've got to be, they've got to think a few years ahead, right? And I think a lot of the obviously the tech companies already are. But the non-tech companies are some of the, actually, to be fair, some in financial services are as well. But I think in the wider economy, you need to sit back and think, okay, this tsunami is about to hit us. How is it going to displace value in our organization? How are we going to have to reconfigure our organization to be able to adapt to and fully take advantage of AI and not be knocked out of business by more nimble and agile competitors who are using AI.
Yeah. So it sort of reminded me of software as a service. Remember those days, SaaS, and I always remember the tech guys would stand on stage and talk about it. And it was all about them coming up with new inventions and pushing it out to the company, their customers, right? And actually what they were finding is the customers were innovating more with their software at their end to be suitable to them than what they were pushing out. But they maintained that arrogance of the push out rather than bringing it back and integrating it into changes, right? And I think that's where AI will come in.
You're onto something. I think that SaaS is in trouble. The software as a service model is in trouble because it's. I think the kind of products, because AI allows you just on in a ridiculously short period of time to create a custom tool for a particular context and a scenario. So I don't want to sell companies, but I've been working for a data management company. I'm doing some work for a data management company, that's growing very fast. And with its tools, you can create little customer engagement tools very, very quickly. You don't need to use a Salesforce for all the things you might use. So I think the functionality of somebody like Salesforce or ServiceNow is being eroded. Those guys are having to look at how they move into the data stack, and I think Salesforce is already doing that because the need to go to those SaaS guys, they're going to very quickly look very out of date, very legacy, unless they move very fast.
Interesting. Anyone else got any other questions? I think the final big one, of course, is, are we in an AI bubble? Are you looking at the economics? We started talking about it.
Possibly.
We talked about it last week.
Probably like the dot-com boom, right? Like the dot-com boom, right? Same thing, right? So over exuberance.
Steroids. Don't you think it's on steroids compared to the dot-com boom?
Yeah,
I do.
Well, dot-com boom, it was in steroids, right? Like valuations of pets.com and companies that had virtually no customers, but a cool idea, right? If you remember.
But in this case, it's not just that; it's also the physical infrastructure that's been put in place, the forests that have been chopped down to put it in place, the water extraction. It's going to impact farms. It's going to, then you've got people who are going to lose their jobs because of AI, and then you've got all these AI companies who are going to be going out of business because they're not going to get rolled up to the big companies. So you've got that employment loss. You've got the employment loss that we're starting to be reported. You got the investment, which is in the multiple trillions. So to me, it's much bigger than the .com.
I think, but the principle's similar. Sorry, Richard, let someone else.
No, I think if being the finance guy, I think valuations are remarkably similar at this stage to where we were probably in the summer of '99 in .com boom. You probably have, extrapolating current trends, another 6 months or so to go to reach those lofty extremes. You're still very similar on many metrics, i.e. how little cash flow these investments have generated up till now, but you have built the assets, which is always typical of all bubbles. So by that metric, I would be inclined to say that we are in a bubble on valuations. You can even go back to the railroads of the century, where valuations were absolutely extreme in the sector, but you had built them. But the people who were in the first wave all got wiped out, but the infrastructure was still there. Very much as in .com, the infrastructure was there, the fiber optics we built and everything was there, but no one who built them made any money. And I think I would be inclined to believe the same thing is about to happen now. I don't think the .com boom, and I don't think AI had the same profound effects on the world as electrification had, or the combustion engine, which for me would be the two major inventions in the sort of industrialized era. But it's potentially a game changer in many sectors and how we do things. But will you make money out of investing in it? To me, very unlikely at this point. The money has been made. And at this point, it's more about, for me, getting out and perhaps finding the minority of companies who will go on to make more money, because the vast majority cannot. That arithmetic doesn't stack up. At the aggregate level, the arithmetic doesn't stack up. That would be my major point. So for general purposes, I think we are in a bubble valuation-wise.
And when you talk about the companies that will make money, it's the plumbing that's always in the back end, right? But
I don't have enough technical expertise or the lens, but I think that there will always be winners, right? There were winners in the .com boom, even as the bust took hold and most companies' valuations plummeted. There were still people coming out on the other side that grew their valuations and made a lot of money going forward, i.e., Googles of this world, etc. So there will be winners, but I don't think there will be very many winners.
Yeah.
That of inclined to believe that they will be bigger winners, but it's definitely an environment, I think, where you're going to have a huge dispersion between those that go on and those that fall by the wayside.
Yeah, so
because that's typical of bubbles.
Yeah. So it's the same thing, but you're not seeing that there's so much more money going into this now compared to the .com.
Not if you scale sort of, yes, the absolute money thrown at it, but we threw an awful lot of money in the .com boom at the market as well in various enterprises. And it's 25 years ago, so you need to rescale everything. And then the question becomes, is CPI the right way to rescale it, or should we use some tech development denominator to rescale investments, right? Because technology has taken such a large share of the investment pie. So on the metrics that I look on the big lens of the market, I actually don't see a huge difference now to kind of the summer of '99.
Okay. All right. Any other questions for Andy? Joe?
Well, I not so much questions, but I was thinking more about I think the investment thing is a big thing. It's like if you're in investment right now, if you go back, you turn the clock back about 5 years, right? Everyone had talked about data. Everyone had talked about machine learning. It was if you weren't doing that, you weren't on the right track. And now I think that the thing is the story must include AI, right? So I figure that we are slightly better off than in .com days, because I think what happened during the .com days, there was a lot of really empty shells being sold. And I remember it was just about, we spent a lot of time just figuring out a name, right? So it was about stuff like that. You're gonna have a name, so you have a name leads to business and all that kind of stuff, and you go like, okay, but what's really in it? And in that sense, it's very crypto, right? It's what does it do? Right now, it just is a URL, right?
Yeah.
And whereas I think in AI, there's a little bit more in terms of what it can do, what it will do. So I've been interacting with companies that are using AI to develop tools that create the next thing, right? So it's AI not as an end to itself, but AI as a tool to the next thing, right? So you have AIs that help industry do better. And I think what's going to happen is you're going to have, as far as the consumer use of AI is concerned, I don't think you're going to have many. You're going to have you won't have a dearth. You won't have a lot of really big operators serving consumers directly. So I think it'll come down to 2, maybe 3 that do it really well. But I think in terms of the rest of it, I think there's going to be a lot of stuff that's happening in the background. As Andrew was saying before, Andy was saying before, it's the enterprise portion of it that really makes sense. I think the enterprise part of it is really going to be about the tools that can escalate. So you're going to have expert users, people who are able to take these tools and therefore scale the kind of business that they're going to do, or provide a service they're going to provide for their customers. And that's going to be the key, I think, for where AI is going to succeed. Your open AIs are going to be the engines. They're going to be the AWSs of that growth, especially if it has to do with language. As far as the Western world is concerned, I think Chinese AI is going to be a similar sort of thing and serving another different part of the world, and that's going to be something that, to a large extent, is going to be opaque, to the external players. But it will also have that impact, because I've been interacting with Chinese shopping sites, and you can see that there's a way that's going. It's doing its own thing as well. So, the thing about whether we're going to get this bubble or whether it's a real, in terms of valuation, I don't think there's ever been a time in history when prices of stocks, shares, investments have really reflected what things are really worth, right? It is in a sense a kind of a scheme where you're trying to fool the next guy. That's really it. But that's what value in terms of investment tends to be about. You make an investment not just saying whether I feel it's worth this today. You kind of make the investment and go like, okay, well, where's the exit, right? Because investments are always about the exit. So where to talk about the value of something based on whether it delivers or not, I think it's not the answer to the question, because we're playing a different game than what the game actually is. If we're saying this business is worth so much in business, then we're missing the point, right? A company right now, in terms of its existence, tends to be about the creation of more wealth, in terms of money attracting or status or potential attracting more investments. It's bringing people who are just brought in by the momentum of things. So if you ask most investors why they're investing in things, they probably wouldn't be able to answer the question. It's just reminiscent of those stories that I hear of people who discover that their portfolio includes Alibaba and they have no idea what it is, and they're a bit embarrassed about having it on, and then they realize after some time that, oh, okay, this turns out to be a great investment. I think that's where AI sits currently. It's a thing that everybody kind of has to have. You ask around, and I was thinking in terms of like back in the day, right? We went through a phase when you absolutely had to have a fax, and even though we had a fax and it was the thing to have, I can almost count on the fingers of my hand the number of faxes I ever received while running my business, right? But it was a thing. Everybody just thought we had to have a fax. When you set up an office, you're going to have a fax machine, right? That's the way it was going to work. And I think right now AI is riding that wave. It's not. I think it's not irrelevant because of where how it continues to grow. Because unlike the fax machine, AI really is developing at a state at a rate that is, I think, leading us to a place that we can't quite imagine, because it actually changes the economics of everything. Because very few people are wrapping their heads around the idea that if AI is fully expressed, we could be in a world where things are really, really cheap. And the ultimate problem for AI to solve is how to make everything as efficient as possible.
And look, I mean, what conversation I've had around AI is the good AI, the boring AI, and the scary stroke bad AI, right? So, I mean, if you think about its potential from a medical perspective, for example, I mean, we've been trying for decades to find better cancer treatments. And, AI really is promising, right? As a way of just looking at patterns and relationships and so on, and finding ways to address it. I mean, if you think about the cancer treatments haven't really moved on very significantly in a long time, and AI does hold promise for that, and ways of treating, other kinds of illnesses, just because of the huge amount of data it can work with to identify these patterns that are used in the medical world, right? And maybe agents to identify it and then say, this is the action that you should take. So this is the kind of good, and there are all kinds of other goods, safety-wise, all kinds of other good things that can potentially do, right? And then there's the scary, which is the Ukraine war, what Palantir and co are doing in the Ukraine, which we could go into real detail around, but perhaps not in this event. Then there's the boring, which is just things like supply chain optimization, inventory management, getting stuff that customers want to them faster and more effectively and in a more customized way, right? Just reinforcing kind of ways we already use technology.
There's undoubtedly all those possibilities, and not disputing that at all. This vision of the world where everything goes along benefits and so on. And in an earlier, I think it was last week, we were looking at that population demographics, and all I see from that is this, what used to be a pyramid is now a kind of like a tree in that way. And all I see is that goes carry on up. And so you end up with a population that's older and older. Of course, you can live longer as well, and so you can stay around, but there's nothing down the bottom. You just float up in the world effectively. And that's what's happening. People freeze their kind of reproductive time in the sense that this which is being promised is somehow better than a population pyramid that actually has people in it. So I absolutely agree we can have all that, but I also see at the same time what that happens. Look at Korea with the lowest birth rate in the world and how that looks in this way. And what that does as it goes on and relies on AI to resolve those things, because they're not actually asking, what are we fundamentally about? They're not asking, why am I here? How do I thrive? What does that mean to thrive? They're asking, how do I provide this? How do I answer that problem? How do I answer that problem? Never actually asking, why is that problem there?
Yeah.
How should I actually think about it? Is it really a problem, or is it telling me I shouldn't be looking at it as a problem at all? And all of those things, all AI does, it drives all the conversation that way. It's like what we said earlier about the conspiracy theory. It drives all the conversation that way, so that it allows ourselves to be manipulated into that thinking. And you mentioned, Ukraine war, Palantir. That's what it does. It's fantastic at it. It's fantastic at pointing out the benefits as a way to see how we can be this population bubble that drifts up and up and up, and somehow we live in this illusion that floating up with no youth, no promises for the youth, is somehow the best state we can have for the world.
Yeah,
that's a very good point.
Yeah, you're so right. You're so right, David. It's just we never seem to want to ask the right questions. What are we solving? And what are our problems?
Well, sadly, one of the ways of for countries with those kinds of population pyramids you're describing, the approach they've taken has been immigration, right? That's how certainly the United States, Western Europe, Australia, a lot of countries have addressed it. They've said, okay, so we're not having that many kids, but there are lots of young people we can bring in from elsewhere.
Yeah, and now we're seeing the response to that.
Now
we're flipping it, right? The Windrush, the 1970s, when countries like the UK welcomed all of those people along because they saw that as its way along, and it caused those problems. But now it's turning the other way around. The small boats are now like
it's a big backlash.
Right?
Yeah, and they're not managing they're not managing the situation properly, so that the people can be integrated into society, so everyone's happy. They're making it. The governments are making it a problem that's becoming a bigger problem, and then
AI is being used to prevent the immigration rather than what Andrea is saying is how to actually create the integration.
Okay, I haven't thought of it that way. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think it's also the prompt, right? I mean, we forget AI for a moment and just think about the human condition in terms of prompts, right? We respond to prompts, we respond to the requests, we respond to how things are phrased and all that as well. So, I was at a meeting the other day, it was just about conversations and stuff about things, and Singapore's big achievement, as seen by many, is this thing about racial harmony, right? And it's because it's a fundamental prompt in the way the society is built. We have certain things that they form the foundation of what we're allowed to do, and it keeps going back to and therefore we won't do this. Certain things are informed. We're all informed by what can't we do. We're informed about what we can't do by those fundamental prompts. We go like, okay, this would be great, but it does it interferes with this fundamental prompt. So I feel many times we're actually at the mercy of benevolent architects, right? We need to have somebody who's trying to build something in that way, and it all comes down to the stories. So we're supposed to talk about science fiction and all those things as well. I think this would be a great time for it, because I believe that we try to live the stories that we feel are right. We get convinced by it. It aligns with our own upbringing, and then it's also about, I think, ambition, right? Are you the sort of person who feels that you want to lead from the front, or you just want to lead a good life yourself? And I think the world, unfortunately, is pushing us in a situation right now where we need to get some control of where the bus is going. Right? The bus driver is just doing their own thing, and we're no longer comfortable with the route that we're on, or generally that we're moving forward. We think something is happening, and at some point, and this is the terrible thing about most change that I've noticed about human behavior in general. I've always said it in terms of like someone has to die, and not literally thinking that, but it almost comes to that, right? If you think about the centrist world that we have lived in for quite a while, become comfortable with, that came out of the Second World War. If the Second World War had not happened, the convincing argument to set up the United Nations, to try and live in harmony, to do all those things, would not have been fully expressed, because the nature of man up to then kind of led to the Second World War. And I think what's happened recently is that we have this whole failure of the promise of what it was supposed to be after that, right? There was supposed to be a bunch of things that happened, and it's not that it hasn't happened, I think a lot of the Western world suffers from this the degree of corruption that's happening with it right now as well, right? It's there is this great degree of broad prosperity, but there's also this degree of inequality that makes it all possible for disquiet to happen. It's the deal that was supposed to be the expectations that come along from saying all this progress, all this development is supposed to lead us somewhere. And then you have a whole bunch of people who are disenfranchised by who aren't getting their share of it. And that leads to the ability of others to come back in and say, look, all these things that were supposed to happen, you can see how it's not working.
Yeah, polarization.
You know.
Yeah. So can I just take us on to the next one, because I think they're linked to what Joe's just saying, and that was obviously the protests in Nepal. And if you're wondering how that's linked, so there was, I think I saw 33 dead. What was shocking was how quickly it happened. Within 6 hours, 19 young people, Gen Z, were killed. So they're called the Gen Z protests. But the biggest story wasn't just turning off social media, it's the corruption. And what I wanted to talk about this topic is within the context of corruption, cronyism, and nepotism. Now, I've been in Asia since the early 2000s. Right across the region, Singapore is one of the least corrupt societies on the planet, but right across the world, this region, it's just endemic. You know, if I drive to Malaysia, I remember the first time I drove with my husband, we put 50 ringgit on a shelf in the car. At lunchtime, at dinner time, you're going to get pulled over because it's time to pay the meal tax, right? You don't argue with it. You know, the cops say you're speeding, you weren't speeding, but you just give them the money, they'll let you go on your way. That's just a basic example. But from a much, much wider example, I've got a lot of friends who work in industries. So the tech industry has been pretty sanitized. The financial services industry is very sanitized. The real industries, the engineering, the getting down to the dirty industries. I mean, by the time everyone gets paid off, the bridge that was going to be built in India over a river so that kids from one side could get to the other side to go to school, there's no money left to build the bridge, or they build a bridge that collapses in the next storm, right? So corruption it's endemic. You know, we've just seen Thaksin's had to go to a year for a jail. That's a corruption charge. I don't think we can overcome the planetary crisis and all the aspects of it unless we look this in the eye. So for me, when I heard about the Nepal protests, it was the fact that this younger generation, and they're the largest majority in the country, they're standing up and they're saying we've had enough. So I just wanted to sort of pass it over to you guys just to see what you think. Who wants to start?
I think it's a reflection of what's happening at large in the world, right? So I totally agree with you regarding corruption. It's a cancer from within that attacks all aspects of how our world and society and economy functions. It's an impediment to all things good, but it's endemic and it's everywhere, and it's on very different levels and different subtleties. But I think all societies are more or less corrupt. I think really smart leaders in years gone by in history have recognized that, and they've tried to tackle it. I think you need to tackle it, and you need to tackle it hard when corruption occurs, because it is really a huge impediment to progress at large. But what happens with the young people is that this is a reflection of how youngsters globally see their future. They don't really buy into anything on the prosperity side, because they can see their world falling apart around them, and their prospects to build a decent future is diminishing by the day everywhere, based on, largely speaking, decisions made by people in our generation.
I'd like to kind of, I had a conversation yesterday. Was it yesterday? Yeah, it was yesterday, with some of the people we talked to in Kenya, and they sent this speech, kind of very powerful speech by this Nepalese young man talking about the situation and all the rest of it. And the problem, and I was responding back and I was saying, look, this kind of protest-based thing to say, you got to do things better for us, and we are somehow here in this way. The government can't do this, and all the rest of it is ignoring the reality. It doesn't matter what color of government it is at the moment. There is not enough of that kind of spare cash floating about for anyone, and it's part of the response of the demographics and all of those things. And in those situations, actually, corruption actually gets worse, because whereas before people have always taken a brown envelope under the table, there's still some left around in that way. Now there's nothing left in that way. So it's not going to get better if we actually do not allow really the young people to leapfrog over what Joe was talking about, how our conventional wisdom has been built. Since the time past the Second World War, since the idea that somehow by coming together in this way, because if you look at how that works, it relies on really a lot of money being produced. It relies on that increasing efficiency and that constant productivity. But, as Richard knows from his part, and he probably expressed better, the governments have been financing and funding the growth for a long time. It's been costing more and more in terms of rich world debt, not poor world debt, rich world debt, in order to drive that extra, 10 basis point of GDP growth, percent of GDP growth, as it were. So we are facing. Sorry. Yeah.
So sorry. I was going to. Do you want to finish off there? Oh,
yeah. So I think the part that is, what I'm working on is really to kind of say, how can young people see all these things as their opportunity to create a different kind of economic agency? And in my mind, what that means is really a very different sort of governance, a very kind of more direct and economic agency, as to achieve that in that way. And the big problem to that is the sense that somehow it needs to be big, when really what it needs to be is just many. And it needs to be based upon understanding how they can nourish others so that they are around as a community that can support them in what they do. And we look for solutions in terms of, take the UK, the Labour government is under tremendous kind of pressure in trying to be the big daddy to provide all these things. And every time it does something wrong, someone else comes along and says, you're doing that wrong, or you're doing that wrong. It's failing to recognize it can't provide. It really can't provide. And when it can be honest about that and get the message out and says, you guys, you know the value you stand for. So why don't we just have a look and see how we can get there? But we can't provide. And that's the message that really would be powerful for young people.
Yeah. I mean, in the case of the UK, it's because it knows that the extremists on either side will tear the Labour Party to pieces.
Right.
If it is honest with the electorate about the situation that it's in, and it's a really fine balance. It's a terrible situation they find themselves in. But yeah, they're going to have to just be honest. But I think the bigger picture that kind of Richard hit upon is this, and it's not just in the Western world. I think post World War II, there was in the Western world this centrist consensus, and there was this feeling that things were becoming fairer, right? And not just, I think it also would have included a bunch of Asian countries as well. It included Singapore in that, it included Japan and South Korea in that, Taiwan as well. There was a sense that things were progressively getting better. And that, I think, in the 80s and 90s kicked into much of the emerging world as well. So if you look at how, even today, we see how fast countries like Thailand and Indonesia have come on, or India, these big, China, obviously, these big middle classes emerging, right? So they've started to address, there's been progress since it's been staggered, but there's been progress over the last, let's say, 80 years towards, helping the bulk, right? They're in the middle. And I think over the last 10 years or so, everywhere we've seen a move away from that. And Nepal is, again, I'm sure it's not a direct link, but it's the same thing, right? So the protesters in Nepal are seeing this polarization, this bigger disparity emerging, this move away from a desire to address the needs of that majority that typically sit somewhere in the middle, right? The ordinary Joe, the ordinary person. And I think we're moving away from that. And dare I say it, we seem to be moving into a world of feudalism at the moment, just away from this, the last 10 years, we've just seen this shift away from it everywhere. And that includes, the Chinese model, which, many thought, is doing fantastic things for the bulk of its people, right? The narrative that you frequently get is bringing, the largest number of people out of poverty in history. And sure, for the average person in the People's Republic of China, they could see their lives getting better and better and better and better until, 7, 8 years ago? And they're facing, I think, overall the same kind of challenge as they just see an elite getting very rich. I mean, sure, there's all these attempts to address corruption in China, but you get the feeling it's very politicized. But they see this elite getting super rich and the ordinary person's situation not getting better. And I think it's happening everywhere in the world now, and it's very problematic, and it's enabling these extremists to consolidate more power in everywhere, right? And it's making it harder for the average Joe to get on, whatever age they are, to be quite honest. I don't think it's just a generational thing anymore.
I think you were talking about the middle class. So there were 500 million middle class people at the beginning of this century. By 2020, we had 3.8 billion. 1.7 billion of them were just in Asia.
So now I suspect it's going down, I would guess, the statistics.
Well, it was supposed to grow to 4.8 billion by 2030, and I'm like, how the hell is that going to happen? Because, when everyone said, why is the climate emergency accelerating so quickly? I'm like, look at the amount of cars that have been put on the road, the amount of fridges that have been bought, the amount of clothes. You've got enough clothes to feed the next 6 generations, right? So it's this explosion of consumption, explosion of energy. And here we are, where the cost of that's going to come, because we were never in balance with nature, right? So,
it's not been sustainable. It's not been sustainable growth. So these huge middle classes emerging is fair, and it's been meeting the aspirations of people, but it's not sustainable. So India is another great example, just the sheer size of the middle class that's emerged just over the last 30 years or so in India. It's astonishing, right? But of course, these people all want the same as the middle classes in obviously the Western countries too, right? And what they want is typically material stuff that is not sustainable.
But their individual consumption is still significantly less than an Australian who buys the most clothes per person on the planet, or Singapore is the most plastic. It's revolting, right? Sorry, David.
I was going to try and share a picture, and you guys carry on. I'm just going to prepare it and download it so that I can share it. It's just taking a minute longer.
So, I mean, that's the other thing, to get to David's point, for governments to get honest and say to populations, hey guys, there are certain things we just simply can't have because it doesn't work anymore. It's not sustainable. We're facing these emergencies on all these fronts. It's really difficult to do when you have extremists on either side pushing populist narratives that undermine those messages, right? So it's very difficult. And the centre was in the 90s and early 2000s inching towards pushing sustainability, the sustainability agenda. I mean, not fast enough, but it was still attempting to give it a go. And that's all being undermined now.
Earlier you said, Andy, you think there's 30-30 on each side, left, right, extreme, and then sort of 40 in between, right? I actually think it's a 70-30 split. So 30% of the extremists on the left and the right. Not what you said. So okay. We talked about this last week. Just go through it quickly, David.
Okay, I'll bring it back up.
So just that, Andrew, just quickly, you mean 30 is the aggregate of extremists on both sides?
Yes.
Because I think you get 30% extremists on the left and 30% extremists on the right.
No, I've been looking at the data. I think we've got 70% in the middle. that.
Also, we still have a centrist mentality.
Yes, we do. But what we don't have is a centre that's confident to speak up anymore. A lot of people have stepped back. They've stepped away from social media. They've stepped away from the conversation. They're in fear. They're in despair. And what we need to do is activate that 70%. And that's where
good.
I think we can start moving forward as a globe. We're having to deal with the extremists. They're not going to go anywhere. But we just have to need to consolidate the majority. I think we can do that. That's my hope.
Yeah. That's an optimistic note.
Yeah, I want to bring up a gender aspect in a way as well in this revolt, in these situations and stuff. I think Indonesia, you talked about a week ago, where they had a very similar thing, and it was based on kind of government favoring themselves. So that's sort of, kind of nepotism type and corruption and all the rest of it. And Nepal has that. In the case when it was Indonesia, they had this pink and green kind of situation where the pink and green were the two colors, and there was a brave pink and a heroic green. There was kind of a woman and a man, and it was much more. And if you look at the populations, it's much more balanced. If you look at Nepal is actually reflecting a problem that is going to be growing in a lot of places, where there is actually this kind of male population by numbers that's growing. And if you talk to Richard about situation in places like Sweden, the women are just better. So, so that's what it is. They're taking over. But there is a large number of males. And you have this sort of gender aspect that doesn't help. I want to bring that up and tie it back to AI, because the majority of material that AI is trained on is from the past. And if you look back at the past, at the roles of women and men and the roles of different kind of groups and so on, they were very distinct and not necessarily what we would like as kind of how we may want them to be. So the natural prompting that Joe mentioned about is biased, not because it's intentionally biased, but because our history is biased.
Yeah.
And we put that on top of the demographics, where for many of the regions around the world, like India and so on, the male population is much larger, but the opportunity set taken is actually dominant because the women do better during schools and those things. And you throw all that mix together and you ask, well, what does AI do in that case? And it's troubling. It's difficult. It's you want to kind of add and say, I don't know what you want to add and say, but actually these are the situations, these are the realities.
I want us to move on to one more topic, and that's science under siege, because I'm looking at the time. So doctors Michael Mann and Peter Hotez. So Michael Mann's famous for the hockey stick graph. He's a presidential distinguished professor at the University of Pennsylvania, and Peter Hotez is a professor of the National School of Tropical Medicine in Texas. So they've published a book together. Obviously, both are coming at misinformation, disinformation, anti-vax, the deniers movement from different perspectives. But they've written this book and they're doing loads of interviews. And if you get a chance, please listen to one of them, because I think what they're doing is really important. I'm waiting for my book to arrive. I think this is part of what I was saying earlier, like the 70% need to rise up. We need to get behind the scientists. I think all of us are people that believe the scientists. We it's not a case of belief. It's a case of they're the ones doing the work. That we've got the health and wellness industry, which is $1 trillion industry, and they're pushing all sorts of stuff out there. And I've got friends in who believe in this stuff, and I don't argue with them. They try and argue with me. I don't argue with them. But I know, Joe, I was going to buy you the book, but I know you're not a reader. Did you get it? Did you buy the audio book? But it's important. Right?
I'll go look for it. I watch the interviews a lot, so I get the
Good.
stuff.
Yeah. So there was a great piece on the BBC called "The Strange History of the Anti-Vaccine Movement," and it actually went back to smallpox, where a doctor realised that milkmaids were not getting smallpox and dying. So they took some pus out of one of them and injected it in a kid and came up with the smallpox vaccine. But religious opposition was opposed to it because one was natural, one was perceived as unnatural. So it actually goes back a long way. So it's not just a social media issue. But I think, science under siege. I personally let's get behind the scientists. Let's back what the work that they're doing. We've got to be a bigger voice in this fight because, the anti-vax movement. Like I said, my aunt got polio as a child, and my kids are vaccinated. I get boosters for COVID. I don't tell other people what to do, but I listen to them. I track the data, and to me, are they perfect? Nobody's perfect, but when they're not perfect, they go and do more science and fix it up, and then keep going until they're never right. They're always updating their science, but I think it's important. David,
I think I feel myself still as a scientist, as definitely a former scientist. Kind of like I spent basically a decade in scientific research in that way. I think that it's important to appreciate that there are facts and that there are kind of non-facts or whatever it is. I thought of this book before. I wanted to write this book about 20 years ago called The Book of Fictitious Facts. And it was meant to be a Christmas sort of present type book where you could go along and you could actually have all these stories about things, but they're all false. They're all kind of lies and stuff. But it's meant to be like a good Christmas kind of party conversation type sort of book. And I still think it would be an interesting book, except when I look around, it's actually we're living it.
Right. Ahead of your time.
In that way. But what I want to say is that the problems people say you want to go back onto science to resolve are not just problems about not appreciating the science. It's actually very often not appreciating the economics. So the science has become increasingly expensive. The kind of advice science that people look to has become increasingly expensive. They're increasingly minute, increasingly kind of advanced in that way. And it's only when you can actually balance the economics together with the science that you get a real appreciation of what the reality you face. And so I look at all the calls in the climate world of saying you must look to the science and all those things. And I look at that and I then go along and put the economic eye onto it. And I think these things are just not going to happen. Where on earth do you think that money diversion is going to come from? You don't really divert committed funds.
I suppose that's not, but David, it's not necessarily the economics from we're not tracking everything that we should be tracking from a scientific perspective because it's physically impossible, like in Antarctica, right? I suppose for me, it's not economics versus science. It's science versus populism or the political narrative that I think is the bigger issue.
Well, I go back to the comment I made before from Draghi at that ECB meeting, when facts meet, kind of belief or faith or whatever it was.
Feelings.
The facts just disappears. And why is that? It's not because behavioral economics classifies behavior as irrationality. It basically denigrates how we see our world and deal with our situations, and that's out of a very scientific picture of economics. The reality of economics is closer to, I keep going on about Elinor Ostrom, which is the Nobel laureate in economics back in 2015. She recently passed away. That sort of says, actually, human behavior should not be judged on that basis. And that aspect of it reflects in how we deal with economic issues and how we incorporate the scientific facts within it. When we actually just push for the science, what we are doing is we're classifying people as being irrational, stupid, or whatever, because they don't accept the science. But the fact is they are juggling a very complex set of motivations and incentives. That's where the economics comes in. That's the essence of kind of that blending along that we need. So we actually need to recognize that. A lot of people use climate and say, it doesn't exist. Kemi Badenoch, it can't reach back to the UK, who recently said, we're going to extract every last drop of oil because, it's still better than for us to do that than it is if we import it in whatever it is. It's based on a particular version of a scientific fact. not the whole picture of a scientific fact or whatever it is, but everything is then used in that way to justify what it is. So it's again denying that richer motivation that people have, which is that basis of economics. So what I'm saying is we have to not just sort of push for science per se. We have to push for that appreciation that our own motivations are always complex and they are always contradictory. So how do we find our way through?
I shared the blue image saying, congratulations if you're a sane person, because you've got this multi-billion-dollar industry marketing. So are we even in control of our own desires, because we're being sold an idea that is so, we're not getting sucked in by it, but it's so all-consuming. The majority of people are walking around living a life that is out of balance with life, but the share prices keep coming up, and pensions are going and all that sort of stuff, right?
Before the summer break, we had a conversation with Kate Critchler, who jokingly mentioned there's probably more money in organizing climate events than there is actually in dealing with the climate situation. And that's part of kind of advocating for the science rather than actually dealing with the actual things. And it's much more profitable to be advocating and bringing all those on, and having yet another conference and charge someone $20,000 to be a sponsor for this thing, where you get a pavilion and 3 tables, and then it is to actually say, how do I actually engage with people in their circumstances, not in my advocacy of what it is, but in their circumstances, to allow them to be the one that comes up with an answer which I won't like, because it's their answer. So it's not invented here syndrome. So I can tell you beforehand that you won't like it, I won't like it.
Can I just jump in here and just want to say thank you, Andrew. I know you have to run. Thank you very much for being part of this today. And this show, as usual, is going a bit long. Understatement of the year.
It's a fantastic conversation. I'm learning a lot, and I have learned a lot. So thanks, thanks so much for having me. Great to chat with you all.
You're welcome anytime, my friend.
Yeah, and be in touch again soon. Hope to join you guys again soon.
Yeah, do.
Cheers, guys.
Take
care. Bye. Have a great weekend. Bye.
You too.
If I can pick up from where David was, he seemed to be close to it. I actually think there's a problem about the elitism regarding science, right? As in what is regarded as science. Like the home baker who is figuring out how to make a better cake. I don't think is regarded in the same category as a scientist who's working in a laboratory, in one of those clean rooms and all the kind of stuff that goes along with that. There's a kind of a thing where you go like, what is science, what isn't science, and then there's also what I think is a problem is there's also the regulation of what is science, especially medical science, right? We ourselves are in a situation right now where we are dealing with cancer, trying to figure out how to best treat a particular cancer, and we are not allowed by the rules that surround us to engage in experiments based on some information that we've got our hands on, right? We've got an idea that this particular drug or this combination might work. But the doctor or the clinician who's in charge of us can't recommend it, or at least doesn't have the data to recommend it, what it's based on, but also can't do the things that, like if you talk about the birth of the smallpox vaccine, for instance, that's an experiment that could not happen today.
Yeah, exactly.
No.
So we've science, unfortunately, and the politics around science, I think, has evolved to the point where it also makes science difficult. As in, like, you talked about how expensive science is. Well, that's because of how political it's become as well, right? If you're doing research and you want to have research that is regarded as sound, it would have to follow all kinds of rules. You'd have to have certain things in place for it to qualify as science, which is why for the longest time TCM, traditional Chinese medicine, has been regarded as unscientific, right?
Mm.
And what it is, in a sense, is basically a similar thing, where years and years of observation and associations have led to the rising belief and confidence that certain things cause certain things to happen, and that becomes part of a greater wisdom. And if you do it long enough and you try to figure it out, and you do there's certain experiments that happen as well, but perhaps not in the same way, you get something out of it as well, some knowledge about it. So I think right now we have a real problem, first of all, with the sense that, oh, that's not real science. So we see someone's observation about something, a curiosity about something, but if they don't approach it scientifically enough, sometimes those involved in hard science tend to say like, oh, that's not really a scientific approach. But at the same time, I think I think that'd be a great place to start for where the next PhD might come from. You go like, oh, this thing that we don't quite understand, we seem to see some kind of correlation there. Let's try and build an experiment around that. It could be useful. Could be worthwhile.
Just to say, there's a lot of problems, right? And there's not a level playing field. And I know Richard's got to go soon. So should we wrap up?
Yeah, I'd like to just finish one thing, because what Joe's talking about really hits with other conversations I've had, and I think that there is so much scope to validate a genuine kind of ground level up, rediscover that curiosity of science in very practical things, and allow ourselves to actually reshape what is meant by education and advanced education and tertiary education. It doesn't have to be at Harvard. It can be in wherever it is.
Yeah, in the kitchen making bread, right?
Yeah.
A lot of people learned about bacteria over the COVID pandemic just from making sourdough, right?
Yeah.
It's cool, that sort of stuff. But I agree. I think it's poor Richard. We've got there's foundational issues. There's a doctor of physics, what's her name? She's gone. She talks about the problems in science and the funding of research, and there's a lot of problems. But we've got to get together, and we've got to get behind each other, and we've got to deal with the misinformation and disinformation. The idea of the polio could be back is terrifying to someone like me who's witnessed the harm that it does. Most people don't even know what that looks like, right? I just saw there was another measles death today, another child, and it was about a year after the infection, but there was a complication, right? That sort of stuff, Anyway, what's keeping you distracted?
My greenhouse.
How are your tomatoes going?
Tomatoes been great, but the big thing this year were aubergines. And I think it's a result of global warming, to be perfectly honest. The aubergines have taken on a level never seen before. So
ratatouille at your place?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, coming. Sign me up, I'm going.
All right, David?
So I obviously, my new book's coming out. I've been thinking about that, and I've been creating these ideas of a Thrive Festivals where young people and young professionals can create something and make some money out of it themselves, anchored around the pillars of kind of believing that the world has a place for you, which is the essence of spirituality, nourishing others so that they can reward you, which is the essence of economic presence, and actually doing it at nature's pace, which is being relentless in tiny steps and don't prejudge what it is. Just give it a go, kind of allow it to happen.
Maybe listening to Andy, the opportunity is to build it on top of AI.
And what I've been doing is trying some AI on top of that and finding out how what I've realized out of it is it's very good at helping me to really structure the step and get me moving on a step. The content itself, you should the nudging it gives you becomes very hard to reject. That's a psychological thing. It becomes very hard to sort of say, actually, when I think about it, really, it isn't what I want to say, because it kind of frames it so eloquently and so well. So
Yeah.
I've been finding out about that and trying to understand how to use it as a tool. And that's where it's different from a spreadsheet. A spreadsheet is flat. You write what you put on it. It doesn't actually come up with that thing for you. But that paperclip that Microsoft used to have, that would suggest things for you, and somehow separating from that. I find I end up, instead of going along the lines that I actually think and write in my book, I'm now veered towards how it is. And when I talk to people, there's an element of that's how you need to sell it. You know, that's how you need to reach the people. Their language is XYZ, so you have to speak XYZ. But then you end up in this world where you're never going to change, because everything is now forcing each other.
Yeah. I've been reading some editors saying that they're getting all these books to edit, and they've all been written with AI, and it's driving them crazy. So yeah, it's like taking the insight, but knowing your own voice.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I don't write with it. I can't. If I put I put writing in, I say, don't edit my work. Tell me what I'm missing, or something like that, but don't edit me.
I'm not. This is not editing. This is taking kind of structuring from it. But even in that way, you know, it always tilts it. It always kind of like, you know.
Yeah, it's an interesting process. Joe?
I'm going back to a TV series that had its beginnings in the 70s. So it's a reboot, and the reboot was in 2003. But it's the 1978 show Battlestar Galactica.
Oh yes.
Yeah. So
is it sort of cringy?
No.
What's really great about the show? This is the reboot of the series that was in 2003, and as I'm watching it, really, what I'm amazed by, and I think this is going to be a similar experience if you delve into it, is how relevant it is to what's happening today. Because for those of you who imagine it based on your experience of Battlestar Galactica in the 70s, you can't quite imagine, you know, I think as far as it can go. But what it actually is it's an amazing socio-political show. It talks about the mixture of military, civilians, and whatever it is, and it takes you to surprising places. So it really is a very, very good show. It holds up really very well because it's about an imagining of a society that is in a terrible place, right? Because, and I won't talk about the circumstances that where you find Battlestar Galactica in, because if you haven't experienced it, you should also, you know, have a chance to do that. But if you can, seek it out, and if you can find it, go look for it. The series, the Battlestar Galactica 2003. Even if you haven't seen the original, it really does hold up. It's something I'd recommend, and I do recommend to people today. And it's just, for me, surprising, and it's a wake-up call to really how human beings maybe haven't changed all that much, because the series that was put out that long ago is telling stories that we see today.
There you go.
Yeah. All right. So just a couple of quick ones. I'm obviously finishing, still watching Chief of War with lots of boys running around in loincloths, which is nice. I've started watching a new series with Steve called Invasion, which is, an end of the world dystopian type of thing, which is, I think it's on Apple TV. It's very interesting. But there's I'm a big National Geographic fan, always have been. I'm a bit disappointed that it's owned by the Murdoch Corporation, but anyway, I don't pay for it. I can't spend money, but they still give me access. There's a Chilean ancient city that's been found, and I was just looking for it and I couldn't find it, and I can't remember it. It starts with P, and it's a society in South America that was peaceful, and by finding this city, they had to leave the city because of climate change. About they were 3,000 plus BC, right? But they were a peaceful society. that never went to war in times of lack. And I just think it's a really good story that I'm going to. It needs to be shared more widely. We don't have to take the path we're on, and there's historical evidence of somebody or a group of people who didn't take that path. They had a peaceful coexistence, and they all moved. I think they moved further towards water to glaciers because there was a big drought. That's a 170-year drought or something. So yeah, I thought it was a really great example that we can do this together, even with all the people that we've got in the world, if we choose to. All right.
I think we don't have a choice.
Yeah. Well, that's we've got two paths. How we approach it, right? Let's choose the right path.
Indeed.
All right. Good to see everyone. Good to have you back, Richard. Get better.
Thank you.
And we'll see you in a week.
See you in a week, guys.
Yep. Catch up when you can speak again.
Yeah.